Sending it all, Charlie. What is? I don't. Okay. Can I have them back?
Ideas are flowing.
These are already up.
You got this guy? Those are already at your seat.
Okay.
Those are already at your seat. Oh, wait, all of these are all.
Are these worth a hootie tootie or not?
Are they what?
Are they worth a hootie tootie?
I've never tried them.
Copies. Several of the commissioners have taken my copies that day, so there may not be any for the audience. So if not, you'll have to ask someone to relinquish theirs because they already have a set of them.
Okay.
Because there's only like 3 sets.
Hopefully we won't have much more of an audience.
Let's call this meeting to order. We'll start with roll call.
Benson.
Here.
Burton. Here. Hoffman. Here. Minor. Here. Mosier.
Here.
Schramm. Here. Weber.
Here.
Aaron Johnson. Here. Suzanne Gigliola.
Here.
Next, we have public appearances. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to address the commission about something not on the agenda for this work session, please step to the microphone. Seeing no movement, we will move on to City Manager Amy Leone and our 2020 budget.
Okay. I know a lot of you want to go through this line item by line item and spend as much time as we can on each department, but we're not going to do that. I'm going to try to rapid fire you a little bit here on the CIP so we can get through the bulk of it before our regular meeting. So if at any point you want to slow down and want to talk about anything in more detail, just interrupt me and let me know. We are taping this in the interest of transparency, and it is being broadcasted or live casted. So if the department heads get asked questions, I'll ask you guys to go to the mic and speak through the mic so that you can be heard. So like I said, I'm not going to go through line item by line item. What I'd like to do is guide the conversation a little bit differently. I will go in order of our CIP, and I'll just hit some of the bigger and more substantial projects and equipment purchases or something that's new, a new program, et cetera, and we can visit about those things. So you can follow along there. I probably won't be talking page numbers, but if you get lost, I'm working off of the printed version, so those page numbers may or may not be different than it shows up in OneDrive. I won't be talking too much about the out years, the 5 years. More, I'll be talking about this year, the remainder of this year, and next year, but we can certainly talk about those if you have questions or want to talk about something in greater detail. Color coding. There's a little bit of a guide here at the front of your budget, but just as a reminder, yellow is an increase or a change in funding. So if you see something highlighted in yellow, that means an increase or change. Green is a decrease. And then the sort of rainbow effect you have there is the different series or different, we call them series, the different budgets that we have and whether or not they're enterprise fund or special revenues, that type of thing. So let me know if you have questions, and we can talk about any changes that you might want to have. Sometimes the commission has a project that they don't see in the CIP that they'd like to include. So this is the evening to talk about that because we're early on in the budget process. You just have to let me know what's important to you if it's not included. But tonight is that time to talk about those. The next time you see the budget, we will have our operating included, and we'd like to be presenting sort of our first final draft to you guys. There is still opportunity to change it, but by the time you see it again, we'd like to have it pretty much wrapped up. The garbage is outside the hallway, and the bathrooms are down to the left if you're not sure of that. What I'd like to know before we adjourn, because we have a regular meeting at 7, is are we going to keep going? Because we do have an executive session. If we don't finish before we adjourn, are we going to keep going? Or are we going to adjourn after our executive session and then come back tomorrow night? Because we also have tomorrow night published as a possible meeting if you guys want. So just let me know that for sure so we can let the public know. I put the mission statement in front of Commissioner Minor because I thought she would be willing to read that for us. But I forgot to ask her before.
The mission of the City of Yankton is to provide exemplary experiences, services, and spaces that create opportunities for everyone to learn, engage, and thrive.
Thank you. So we put the budget together for you using that strategic plan as the basis and as the guideline. So that's how we made our decisions. I've also heard from you, many of you, since March that you agree that there is a shift in our priorities now after our event that we had in March. So I think that the budget still accurately reflects the strategic plan and those sentiments. I will say how timing is going to look different now. So the way the vision develops is going to look different, but I don't think we've strayed from your vision and our mission statement. I am going to skip over, in the chronological order here of the budget, the aquatics facility as well as Marne Creek, because that's where a lot of our flooding projects are. And then I'd like to come back to those because those are going to be a little more in-depth discussions. So I'm going to hit some highlights, and then we're going to go back to those two things. And then we'll talk about outside agencies and the BBB tax. Sound like a plan? Okay. First things first, our budget is going to be much larger than any other budget that the community has seen before. So this year, I think we're roughly 57 million, and gasp and hold on to your pearls next year when that final number comes in. It's going to be a lot higher than that, and that's because we have a lot more expenses that we have to plan for. So we're putting in 18 million in expenses over the course of 2 years for FEMA and federal disaster flood repair, Whether that's an accurate number or not will be yet to be determined with our help from FEMA. We'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. And we also have another big multi-million-dollar project, the aquatics facility. So it doesn't mean we've identified revenue sources for all of those or that we'll have all the revenue sources. So just because we budget for something, if we don't get the grant or we don't get the assistance, we can't fund the improvement. But a lot of people are going to look at that number and they're going to think, wow, we've increased the budget so much, and we will have. But an increased budget also means we have plans on the horizon and that we're doing things. So that's important for everyone to know and for the public to understand that it is going to increase. So when people see that number, help them pick their jaw up off the floor and help me explain to them that, the reason why is we have a lot of big things on the horizon. So going through a little bit, the first really big change you see in finance and IT is we're going to be replacing, upgrading the AS400 system. For those of you that don't know, AS400 system is our software. It's integrated software that helps us with all our billing and financial software, and we've kind of got a dinosaur working right now, and so that's on the horizon. When that dinosaur goes extinct, we may be doing something with our different with our billing, because I don't know that the postcards will still be something that the new system generates. It may be, it may not be, but that's on the horizon in finance and IT. In community development, we have a couple of things to talk about. Well, one thing actually, we have a additional car. Community development manages our fleet for our city. So we have a lot of people that go to a lot of trainings, and we have a lot of people that are going about the city throughout the day for business. Now, some of the department heads, of course, have car allowances to do that, but many of our employees are taking their own cars to do things, and really technically they should be taking a city car. We don't always have a city car available, so this would be adding an additional car to the fleet. So, for example, the library can make their deliveries to different places they go, and Dwayne can haul around computer equipment to the different departments and things like that. So that's in the budget. The police has budgeted 3 cars next year. 2 of those are normal replacements, and 1, I believe, is an unmarked vehicle. So that's in the budget for next year. There's also a couple of other things. One that you'll be talking about and considering in more in depth in the police budget is the reserve program. So we've talked a little bit about that. I think I sent you an email. The reserve program is really highly trained volunteers to assist our police department with our effort to community police. And I think that does that in 2 ways, not only by assisting with events and things of that nature, but also these are individuals people don't know as police. They know as their neighbors and friends, and that would be working with our police. So their thought is to start with 2 folks and see how the program goes, pilot that, and see how that goes. You do see in the out years there something called scenario-based training. And scenario-based training is really aimed to help our officers make better decisions under high-pressure situations, and we all know that that's a reality. And it also has a number of other features. It's basically software that puts them in a more realistic environment. So I know the police department would like to see that incorporated this year into the budget. I have it right now in 2021, beginning in 2021, because there is a generous expense to that. But if that's something you'd like to talk about a little bit more, certainly you can do that with either myself or the police department. We have radios and helmets in the fire department. Not too much there to talk about with capital. We had some big capital expenses this year, but as always, there's some grant money budgeted for equipment. So where possible, Tom and Larry will be applying for grant funds for that equipment, and if that's not eligible, they'll be applying for other equipment that's always needed in the fire department. The street department isn't that exciting this year. Of course, they're always buying a couple of trucks to replace in our replacement schedule. Also, we'll talk about, you see, the 170 under active transportation plan projects. That's has to do with our active transportation plan, and I'm going to visit with you a little bit about that line item later on. That plays into some of the work that we want to do associated with our aquatics facility. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. In snow removal, we have some regular replacement of some equipment that is just based on a schedule. That equipment, obviously, when it's used, it's hard. I want to say hardly used. It's used hard because of the nature of what it is. So we need to keep up on our snow removal equipment. City Hall, the big news in City Hall is our wiring project. A lot of our wiring is in need of upgrade. Some of it may even be original. And it's just not cutting the mustard. We're experts at knowing how many, if you can have a crock pot going and make coffee at the same time, and, all those types of things. But we do have to be careful in City Hall, and we have had some electrical issues. So $100,000 probably won't do the whole project, but Greg Homestead and Dave Mingo have been working closely with Dwayne and talking about sort of the priority areas. So we'll probably see that come back in future budget years as well, but we'd like to get started on that next year.
So Amy, with that wiring project, I know at one point, long ago, we were talking about some renovations at City Hall. Is that still something that's on the radar, and should we look at coordinating those?
Well, our City Hall isn't really conducive to modern day business, and I think everybody knows that. It'd be nice if we had a central area where we could have central receiving and everyone could come into one place and directed where to go. We have a lot of folks that wander around and because they don't know where things are, and it's not easy to find, and then it ends up they're supposed to be over at court services or something and they're not even in the right building. But it's not ideal. In order to really remodel in a, I think, meaningful way, we'd have to talk about the gym, and nobody has really wanted to do that. We are pretty cramped. But we're getting by, I think. So we haven't talked about renovations. I think the wiring is going to be necessary whether or not renovations occur. Some of the departments have carved up offices. I know Adam has carved up some office space in his department, and so has Dave, to make room for employees. I think we could probably squeeze one more person upstairs if we needed to somehow. But yeah, it's tight, and it's not necessarily as secure as we'd like it to be either.
Yeah, that would be my other question is, so many businesses are looking at additional security measures, one point of entry versus in City Hall, it's pretty porous. People can just enter and wander around it.
They do.
And, we just had an incident where a municipality dealt with the shooting, so it's just something I'm sure employees have on their mind.
Yeah, well, we're certainly, our safety committee in partnership with our police department, we're more aware of that than anyone because we hear those things, and have emergency response plans for each of our departments. Any place, you can't make any place 100% safe, but we can talk about personal safety and having a plan should we have to deal with something that we don't want to. Our building is, I always say it's an oldie but a goodie. We also like our building, and it's in a nice location, and it has its quirks like in any old building, but I think it's serving us well, and the gym space is well used, so that's probably a conversation we will want to have at some future point, but I don't think it's in the near future. Unless five of you tell me otherwise. We're going to be doing some projects at the airport. Many of you know that that crosswind runway is a project that's on the horizon, and that's 100% FAA funded. We talked about that at our last meeting. We also have the hangar relocation, hangar and the tile hangar demolition, as well as the apron expansion. Those projects probably won't both happen next year. We have them both in the budgeted next year in the sense that we will probably start spending some money. So there is a match to the hangar relocation, 5% city, 5% state. So while those are still big numbers, we are getting a good project from the FAA, and we've been pretty successful in FAA receiving FAA funding. So,
So the numbers in here, these are total project costs, not our costs.
let me go back and look. Yes, that's the total. That's the total project, and then our share is the portion of that. Moving on a little bit, nothing too big in the library, but they do have some roof repair that needs to happen. So we're going to talk about doing that next year. The library is a good example of one of the issues where we were talking about a new library and collaborative space, and those conversations we still want to have on the table, but they're not on the coffee table anymore. They're in the dining room table, and we're gonna still have those conversations and open that. But I think the timing and what that looks like changes unless we have an active group of citizens come forward like we did with our aquatics facility. So. We're still talking about that, but I don't think it's on the forefront of the horizon. So that's why those things are pushed out a little bit further. Parks and Recreation, we have some park equipment budgeted. We're going to talk a little bit later about some irrigation and some other projects, but the park equipment that's budgeted, I believe, for next year is going to be in Memorial Park. Is that right, Todd? In Memorial Park next year, so hopefully we can get a little bit updated swing set and things like that in that park, and that'll be a nice complement to what's going to happen in that park. Sertoma Park, we have some sidewalks, parking, comfort station. This won't complete the project, obviously, but I wanted to leave some money in the Sertoma Park because we've pushed improvements in that park a lot, and we've also had a lot of community people step forward and contribute to Sertoma Park. So I feel like it's time that we pay a little attention there. So that's why those things are in for next year. I'm going to skip Memorial Park Pool for the moment. We'll come back and talk about that. And we'll also come back and talk about Martin Creek extensively here in a little bit.
Excuse me, Amy.
Yes.
In regards to the park, back to the park, Riverside Park, in the amphitheater cover, we get a lot of many complaints. Is that the 85 and 57,000, or is that different? Is that a different stadium, or is that the? I was just wondering about get a lot of comments in regards to the actual amphitheater down there being covered or assessed more so.
The stadium improvements are to do with the Ted Church and the Ted Field. I have a hard time with the last name. The amphitheater railing is the railing at the actual band shelter, or the amphitheater shelter. So is that what you're asking? And we have had discussion about the hope for a new amphitheater at some point. Again, still part of the vision. I just don't think it's, I think it's out there in the future beyond what this plan is looking at. But we can certainly put a placeholder in there.
I would jump in on the amphitheater railings. That is my grocery store issue. I get stopped every time I'm at the grocery store to talk about the amphitheater railings, which is fine. But that is, people are concerned about safety, and I know it's just a tiny drop in the bucket. But I wonder if there are some ways we could creatively approach funding something like that.
Yeah, if it's important to 5OU, we can move something out. We've pushed it for a number of years, knowing that, thinking that we may be doing a replacement of the amphitheater, but that's further out now in the future. So if 5 of you are saying it's important improvement to see happen, we can move that. We have one individual who is very passionate about that, and we regularly, annually hear from that individual.
Would that person, do you think, be interested in forming some sort of little citizen group?
I don't think so. Just
Okay.
based on their ability to be involved right now,
Okay.
or
Okay.
The 20,000, is that an actual figure, or is that just kind of a guesstimate?
My understanding, it was an estimate that we put in probably 5 or 6 years ago, so we would have to probably get a better number.
We just did this, or we're in the process of working with the skaters at the skate park, and they're fundraising on their own, and then we're going to match whatever number they come up with to help them replace the skating equipment. I was wondering if there was some way we could work with some of our concerned citizens to do some fundraising and maybe come up with some kind of match. They just get, I love them. Every year they're older, and they've had their surgeries and sore hips and knees, and it scares them, so I want to take care of them, that's all.
Okay. Any other questions on the parks? Nothing big to talk about with Bridge and Street Fund for next year. I do want to call your attention to the radio project and dispatch. That's a this year project, but that's a significant one. So we're coming in hopefully on finalizing that project here in the next few months. Water, Kyle is still doing a good job spending money. Where'd he go? There he is. But we should be online at the water treatment plant, by the end of this year, early next year. And that project is going well right now. They're in the middle of doing their landscaping, and we're asking for the intersection improvements either to be completed before Riverboat Days or not started until after Riverboat Days. So that project's coming along. So underwater utility, you see a number of projects. They have a truck that they're going to plan to purchase next year, some SCADA system upgrades, some equipment upgrades. The PLC upgrade you see stands for Programmable Logic Control, and I understand those are what monitor the water levels. Is that correct, Kyle, in the water towers? So those are in need of replacement. The water utility projects on the streets, we've done a better job here in the past few years aligning those up with the actual street construction projects that are going to happen and the wastewater projects. So we've timed that out. And so those are scheduled. The biggest one there is going to be Riverside Drive, Lynn to Green, and I know we've been talking about Riverside Drive for a couple of years, but that's one that we have moved around, but it's going to happen next year. It's going to happen. In wastewater, we have another pickup truck that's being purchased. We have some modeling development and flow metering development that we want to understand to help us better prepare for the future and what we might need to know when we then start moving into our wastewater master planning project to determine long-term down the road what's the best scenario for our wastewater plant. So it's an important enough project that we want to do a lot of planning to understand our flow and how much infiltration we have and all those types of things to see what our best solutions are. So that's where you see those numbers coming in for those things. Also under wastewater, we have Riverside Drive because we have some utilities, sewer utilities that need to happen there. There's a number in the wastewater that's $260,000. It's a street repair. That'll help us with the sinkhole project that we've encountered. I think that was about a $250,000 estimate. So.
I have a question. My grandson says, I have a question.
Okay.
Question. The reserve for future improvements. Seems like, why do we just throw, it seems like, I know there's, in the past, we saved for some projects, but is there possible of, because we know we're gonna need more money than, and what, how do we come up with 35,000?
Yeah, I think you're not the only one that asked that question, and then I wondered if we should change it. That is an old number that's been in there a long time. We've always put that in there because we know we're always going to have some equipment replacement come up in wastewater, just due to the age of the facility, and we for sure know we will next year and this year. But yeah, that line item isn't meant to put money away so we can build a new plant or something like that. That's not going to happen. But we can put more money in that budget, but you can't spend it twice, Al told me this year.
It looks good, right? Say, hey, we have money put aside for the new plant. 35,000.
Under solid waste, and we have a compactor truck that we need to replace, and so that's a big expense, big purchase for solid waste. And then our joint powers, we have a lot of different projects you can see there that need to happen. We have trailers that need to be replaced, walking trailers, rubble trench that needs to have some attention. The skid loader needs to be replaced. We need to purchase an excavator and conduct some floor rehabilitation. All of these projects are going to be dependent upon how the health of the joint powers budget. So we may need to do some prioritization. I had a conversation with Adam today, who's talked with District 3, and some of these may be eligible for loans, low interest loan programs. So we'll work with District 3 on that. A lot of people don't go out to the transfer station or into the insides of it, but our floor, for example, is the metal on the sides of the where the semis load is torn up, and it's unsafe, I think, for employees, but also hard on our equipment. So that needs to be addressed. And again, that's another area where everything that's used there is used hard, so it doesn't last as long as we'd like it to. This is the first year that we don't really need to talk about Fox Run, so I'm not going to unless you want to. Todd will work through their requests. Of course, we have a set budget amount that we're obliged to assist with. I think good move. We've had a lot of questions from other cities about what we're doing there. And I don't know if I sent it to you all, but I did send Todd an article about the city of St. Paul selling one of their golf courses off. So I think it was good to find some folks that are able to manage, and we've had good feedback from the public on that. Summit Activity Center, you can see there, for those of you who are new, you have some numbers behind the items, and what those are is whose share is what. S is school, C is city. It sounds like the parking lot is going to be in the neighborhood of $763, so we have enough budgeted there. We're working through that with the school. We also have some facilities to upgrade there planned, doors on the aquatics portion, UV system, some carpet replacement, and some painting that needs to be done. So that facility's getting to start to age, and things need to be replaced and spruced up. So
Is the number that we see our portion of it, or is that the total project?
that's the total project.
Total. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Otherwise, that'd be a really the nicest parking lot ever. It will be a nice parking lot, though. I think they're talking about a spot especially for you. Let's talk a little bit about the 506. That's one of those where we kind of have a bunch of different colors there. You can see that we have some annual expenditures there, and those have remained stagnant, I guess, in the amount that we budget for them. We have a couple of projects we want to talk about. This is our last year to build out TID number 8. That's 23rd Street west of West City Limits Road. So we have $200,000 budgeted for engineering, and then the construction costs in the next year. So we need to do that because we're running out of years in that TID. So that's planned. Of course, Riverside Drive, Broadway to Green is planned as well. 5th Street, Broadway to Green, 12th Street, Douglas to Mulberry, and Pine Street, 10th to 15th. That's, I think, on the next, that might have gone over to the next page. Yeah. I'd like you to take a look at the ending balances there on that special improvement tax. At the very bottom of that section, there's the ending balance there. So you can see if we do all the capital that we have right now in the budget, where we'll end up. And certainly that's, reflective of what we need to do. We always need to prioritize and push things out based on what we think is a need and important to do versus what would be nice to do. So there's a lot more work to do than we have money for, and that's always the case. But just keep in mind of all the, as we add different projects, that number gets bigger.
I don't see 13th Street. Is it 13th?
13th Street.
13th? Is that 12th? Okay. Douglas Mulberry. Okay, got it. Thank you. Yes.
And then under central garage, there is a couple of repairs. Many times there's not a lot of capital in central garage, so that's why I bring it up. A tire machine, some pavement repair, and some electrical work that needs to be done. A lot of times we ignore our own facilities to do capital projects other places in the community, but we do have to pay attention to those and work through those a little bit. So we're going to make a few changes, few upgrades in central garage. I'm happy to talk about the things you're interested in. Otherwise, I'm interested in talking about Marne Creek and the aquatics facility. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. You might want to take a look at the Marne Creek section of the capital budget as we're talking about this. I'll find the page number here for you. Page number 11, thank you. We're going to have our first real meeting with FEMA on July 17th. So as you guys know, the budget has to be submitted by July 31st. So we won't have a lot of time in between July 17th and the 31st, and probably won't make a lot of changes to the budget. What we put into the budget for Marne Creek is $9 million in improvements in 2020 and $9 million in 2021. Probably isn't going to shape up like that. In fact, I can guarantee you it won't shape up like that. We just do not have enough information right now to have any idea to know what programs are going to be available to us and what the competitiveness of the programs are and how well our projects are going to fit into those programs. We have invested, you have invested in a contract with Stockwell Engineering to help us prioritize projects along the creek, and they're going to be able to help us say, okay, I think you really need to focus on, these 1 or 3 or 5 projects right away. And that'll help us prioritize both from a funding standpoint and from an operations standpoint. There may be some things that we are going to need to pay for up front and apply for reimbursement for that just can't wait longer, and there may be some things that we can hold off on. So that's why we've asked you guys to have that relationship with Stockwell to help us determine what those projects are. I'd also like to have a little discussion with you about future improvements. So we don't currently have a project on the creek north and west of the mall. We haven't done a lot of work there in terms of stabilization, in terms of clearing out the creek. We put a number of, I think, $2.5 million in an out year there. And I realize that's adding something new to the project, but we are getting a lot of development on the west side of town. That's where we're seeing our growth. And the better improved the creek is up creek, the better, we can manage flow further down. So there might be an opportunity to apply for grant funds to do a project there. So if there's interest in that, that'd be something nice for us to know. I certainly wouldn't recommend doing that over a priority area closer to our infrastructure and closer to where we have damage. But I think it's worth talking about because there may very well be funds there available to do that. And eventually that probably is going to need to be an area in the community to address. So we saw what happened in that area of town, and having somewhere for that water to go or more area for that water to go would have been helpful. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Also, I've heard from many of you that while the trail is a maintenance trail, that it's become a recreational trail and become an amenity for our community, and that you would all, not maybe all of you, but that some of you have expressed you'd really like to see that either located near the creek or possibly relocated if we can't relocate it near the creek. So that might be able to be part of this project depending upon what they will fund and what not, or it might be something we need to add with city funds over a long period of time. But we are known for our trails. We have just gone through an active transportation program indicating how important it is to have intermodal transportation. So I think long range it should be in our plan to replace or relocate.
I think it's important to be proactive instead of reactive, so, I think we can go ahead and look into that. I got a question on the Martin Creek Corridor Utilities Preservation Project for $775,000 for this year. What is that?
That's the project that we budgeted for last year, and we received the grant from the CDGB grant from GoEd, and we were all ready to go and ready to bid out, and then March 13th happened, and so then we had to ask for some additional engineering and additional work. I mean, it's a bigger project now than it would have been if we would have gotten it complete prior, but we hadn't planned to. We plan to do it this year, but that's that project.
Okay, and so that'll get pushed off into 2020, is what you're saying, or is it still?
We're planning to do that to bid that out and get done yet this year.
Okay.
In 19. Likely there'll be, the need for us to spend money up front. I didn't have a formal conversation with FEMA. It was just an informal conversation, but they indicated to me that, some of the disaster funds that our region received for areas of the country in 2013 are being expended now. So we could very well need to be, spending up front and then looking for reimbursement. And we're guessing that FEMA's number won't be the same as ours. They may not, think that 18 million is the correct number, or it might not be the number that they replace, or they base their funding on. But we wanted to put kind of our best assumption and be generous about that. So we're trying not to surprise you later with numbers and projects as they come in.
So the next 2 years, the $9 million, that's for, how does one begin to recover from this? Is it stabilizing the banks? Is it, what needs to be done? Have we done our bridge assessment?
Yes, so our bridge assessment, our engineers have looked at our bridges, and we've also had an outside firm look at our bridges, and our bridges held up really well. Thank goodness, we didn't have any major issues there. Roads handled the water fairly well. Our main issue, I would say, is both at the wastewater treatment plant and the creek. And so our immediate triage has to be stabilizing the public infrastructure. You know, the 775 or 777 or whatever that number is the where we have exposed water line that used to be protected, you know, by the creek. And so those types of projects need to come first. And then Stockwell will be giving us some advice based on their work as to, okay, here's your real other, you know, here's triage, here's, you know, broken leg, and here are things that are symptoms over time that you can, you know, work with. So we'll base our projects on that and couple that with funding. Now, in some cases, particularly in Kyle's case at the wastewater plant, there may be a lot of projects that aren't immediate need, but they fit the funding programs because we can directly tie the funding to jobs and all the industry that's, you know, using our wastewater plant. And so I think that might make a determination there too. But of course, he has some immediate needs as well. So we're going to have a lot of discussions, and I would presume that in the fall, one or more of our work sessions is going to be spent talking about some of these projects and you know, getting consent on applying for grants and things like that. Anything else on FEMA or flooding?
I would just concur with Chris and your thoughts on the West Martin Creek work that should be done.
There is some good news, I guess, in this. You know, our staff worked really hard when we had the opportunity to get information put together, and I've been told that the state was most impressed with the information we put together. And when I had the informal conversation with FEMA, she said the best information came from your municipality. So that makes me feel like if there is funding, and then we can couple that with being ready through the work we're doing with Stockwell and having District 3 helping us as they always do, and having a couple people on staff who've been through this type of thing before, we have a really good chance of leveraging a lot of dollars. So I feel pretty good about that. So thank you to the staff who all did that and worked hard for that.
I think we're going about the right way. I agree with the timeline and the priorities that we have set forward as far as our infrastructure, but it's such a moving target. You know, we don't really know a lot right now, but we are planning for whatever can come forward. But I think the question is, how much of a priority is it for this commission to rebuild Martin Creek Trail System? I mean, we could easily say that's good enough, we're not going to finish it, but I feel like it's important that we try to get at least as much of a product as we had in the past. I know some places it's going to be hard to build where the trail is. We already talked about that, going up on top, and maybe there's a different route, but still, it's such a part of our community now. You think, well, it's not a priority, but you know, it kind of is, you know, especially the city we are and what we made it to be with the priority we've set forth. So I think we should, and I think it's so complimenting the staff, how they work with FEMA, and they worked with the SBA, whoever agency we were working with, to make sure, in the same way we with the FAA, make sure that we're prompt and courteous in all of our dotting our I's and crossing our T's, and if we continue to do that, I think we're going to be having a working relationship with whatever funds are available, and plan on not any funds. We need to be somehow lay it all out so we can prioritize and not just sit there and rely on federal funds, because how do you know? But we need to, I myself, to prioritize the Martin Creek as to rebuild.
Yeah, and in some cases, I think the answer will be that, hey, it's not, you know, we're either going to have to acquire some property in certain places, or it might be, hey, your money had to, you know, leave that area alone and connect your trail elsewhere. So we're going to have to, it's definitely going to look different than it did. And we'll just have to wait and see. And it's certainly not going to be something that's completed next year or the following. It'll be a long-term plan. And I'm guessing when we move into our next discussion on strategic planning, we'll talk about putting that recovery more into our vision. Other questions about flooding? Okay, I'm going to talk aquatics facility a little bit. Dive in Yankton estimated in December, just before we had our opt-out, that the project was going to be in the neighborhood of $14 to $14.8 million for the aquatics facility. We're getting a little closer on our cost estimate in terms of getting further down the line with design, and that's changed. I do want to reiterate that a lot has changed since that time. So since we started talking about the project, 2 years has gone by, number one. We've also had more involvement with design, more detailed involvement with folks like the swim team and Dive in Yankton folks, and soon we'll be visiting with neighbors on landscaping and those types of things. We've included some of their thoughts also into the design. We have incorporated a more robust drainage plan. Prior to 2018, I hadn't seen standing water in Memorial Park, and now 2 years in a row, it looked like we already built the swimming pool for a couple weeks until we got all that water pumped out. So we know that drainage is an issue in that park and in that neighborhood. So we thought it was fair to say, while we're doing this, now is the time to address the drainage issues that we have on our public property. Now, certainly that doesn't mean that Dave Mango's never going to have water in his basement again. Sorry, the people that live in that neighborhood there's still a high water table there, and there could still be issues there for those folks. But I think overall it will be much better for certainly the park and probably the neighborhood overall. Makes sense. That makes sense to me. We also talked a lot about and had a heartfelt discussion about our mission, and that's part of the reason why I wanted you guys to hear that mission statement again. Thought it was important when we talked about exemplary services and spaces, everything within the boundaries of the aquatics facility fence was planned to be irrigated, and it was brought up, and I thought wisely, why wouldn't we, while we're doing this, also irrigate the northwest corner of the project and set off that area of the park really nicely. And oh, by the way, since the focal point of the park is the Veterans Memorial, and the veterans we know are going to be working to include an additional memorial there and upgrades to their memorial, we should probably address our trail system there leading to that memorial from that side of the park. That was in your long-term capital plan anyway, and it was something that we talked about and pushed in visiting with our engineer. That isn't something they plan for. However, something that we thought, an economy of scale made sense to do while we were doing that project, because there's going to be a lot of concrete poured throughout that project, so doesn't it make sense to add that? So those are a couple things that were added. I certainly also wanted to make sure that our technology and sound improvements were made, and as we talked about the project, I was under the understanding that that was something that was included initially, and it was not, so we also have that to consider into the project. So we got our first estimate here in early June, and that number has increased. I'm going to hand that out to everyone to talk about here in just a second. When we took a look at the first estimate, we were uncertain about the contingency as well, because we felt that the contingency at 5%, which was put into the project initially, was low, and so we asked Stock, let's change that. Well, we were uneasy about that for a couple reasons. Construction costs. This is a really special project. It's not like a road project, so there's a little bit of uniqueness in that, and we felt better having a little more padding. So we asked that to be increased. So I'm going to hand out just a draft here of the preliminary cost estimates. There's not enough I can I can hand out, I've got more up here too. And then I want to talk a little bit about that with you, and then I want to talk a little bit about how you how you may want to move forward. So you see that the total estimated project cost there is 16.9. So again, that's, clutch your pearls. That's a big project. And there's a lot of things there that are included. In addition, we have, obviously things like furnishings for the pool, concession equipment, things of that nature. Many of those things, are not necessary. Is everything in there absolute necessary? No, and we can change the project if the commission feels that we want to be closer to that 14.8 or 15. However, in visiting through the project, we have one shot at this, and how do we want to move forward? I think it's important that people know that this is going to be an exemplary space, and there are so many uncertainties now. At 10%, the contingency is 1.3. So I mean, there's a right there. There's a big number, and that may or may not be necessary. We're not fully designed yet. However, they're getting closer.
There's got to be some typos here, isn't there? 200,000 for a sound system?
Well, we're talking not just a sound system, we're talking also about technology. So, the whatever technology is used to check people in.
Technology is cheaper nowadays.
It is. And I will say, these are estimates. I'm not exactly sure which type of sound system we're going to use.
Maybe just too many zeros in there, probably.
Well, in a minute we'll look at the triple B, and we've got estimated for this room for some sound equipment improvements. We've got 100,000, which we don't think will be enough. So, the cost of things for a facility of that size are big. And we talked a lot over the past few weeks about, okay, let's get this ratchet back down to where we're at. We talked about a lot of things. I can think off the top of my head. Well, lighting was one of them. We could shave back a lot of the cost of the project to, if we didn't have a lighting package, that we just had security lighting, that would just shave off a lot of money. But then we're not having events in the evening and towards dusk. Well, we're only using the project a couple of months out of the year, so we can do some things like that. We can make the bathhouse exterior more plain Jane and not very aesthetic. I don't think that's what we told the community we were going to do. I want you to sit with that for a minute, and it's okay to sit with that for a minute and be uncomfortable and kind of think a little bit while we're talking about what we think we could do if in fact you wanted to take that direction. So Al and Dwayne have been working hard to talk about financing, so I'll have them help me with this conversation. So we have here 16.9 as the estimated project cost. You already know that you transferred $2 million from the second penny there. We're looking at a little over $2 million from Dive and Yankton and their contributions, but we're being conservative there because we just put the $2 million there. The active transportation can help us pay for the trail projects that will be associated with that. We also are going to have our city crews pave the parking lot, which is it's a cost savings to the project and can be part of our internal budget. In a minute, we'll talk about the balance at the BBB. We've included that because we will have to borrow some money, obviously, for the project. But why borrow money that you already have? So that'll be a discussion I'm sure we'll have in a minute, or we can have now as to people's philosophy on that. The bond proceeds are based on the $884,000 opt-out levy. So that isn't going to change. So of course all this money is public money, but we can't say to the public, oh, now the opt-out's going to be higher because the project cost has gone up. That's not the case. So everyone out on social media, listen up. The opt-out is not changing. The opt-out is the opt-out. It can't change. So that's the cost. However, depending upon what interest rate we have, we may be able to borrow, more. It depends upon where that interest rate comes in. And I think I sent you all an email, or maybe we talked about even at our last meeting that Toby Morris is out shopping for interest rates right now on that project. There's also the potential to have some income from the bonds, investing that money once it's received. So there's some potential there. So financially, we think we can make that amount work. However, that isn't what was brought to you initially, and it isn't what we talked about initially. So I want to have the conversation with you all about how it is, what it is you'd like to do, and how you'd like us to finance that.
I guess I agree with you, Amy, in the fact that we get one shot to do this, and I don't want it to be something that we look back on and say, why didn't we do that differently? And then what is it going to cost us to then get it to the state that we want it in at some point? So while we may have to really cinch our belt and put ourselves on a diet at some point, I think we have to do what we need to do to make it right. And to meet our mission of providing an exemplary space, which I do feel that this would be a showcase, if done right, that would really draw people in.
I agree. If you look at examples where we chose, or because of different factors, a project wasn't done the way it should have been, and so now we're paying for it. Look at the school parking lot project and the base issues we're having there. That's costing us now because there wasn't the money or the willpower to do it right then. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure we're doing the project right the first time, and especially because we don't want to get done and people walking in this new facility and saying, well, who decided to build an aquatic center without a sound system, or a sound system that's adequate? I mean, those are the things people will remember.
I wasn't against the sound system, but
I wasn't saying that you were, Jake.
There are naming
It is a
rights.
big figure.
Naming rights are available, Jake.
well, I know it's preliminary and we have not had any bids yet, but other items, the question really, we have surfacing, but we didn't count for the surfacing of the parking lot. Is that correct?
I believe the surfacing is the
Just in,
concrete and the surfacing in the pool area. The sanitary sewer and storm sewer and water main, those costs change when we talk more about the drainage. That we know we thought we should be a little more robust on. And to be honest, that was a community concern as the project started to be designed.
no, I agree. We need a hard surface in the parking lot. I was just wondering if it was doubled up.
Some of the things that could happen too, we talked about, well, we can change some of the major amenities. We can change the lazy river. We could change the slides. We could change the competition pool. I feel like that's going back on a promise to what we said we'd deliver to the community, so that I'm not recommending that to you, but we can get there. We can make any changes now that we need to. The plan is that we'll be bidding out this fall, so there is some time. I think that we should deliver the things that we promised to the community and that they voted for, and understand that some of those things, as they get designed, the costs are higher, and we added things.
As far as financing goes, I think it makes sense to use at least some of the BBB funds, because, if we do this correctly and have a good sound system, have a good scoreboard, have the swim team size pool that we can have host competitions, there'll be nights stayed in hotels for those type of events. And if it is a exemplary location, facility, we may get more events to host, our swim teams do. So I think and people may come from out of town and stay overnight at the hotels to use the facility as well, but I do see money being spent at hotels because of the facility. So I think BBB tax makes sense. It's a hybrid approach to how do we fund this rather than taking it all from one source. So I think that is probably the most economical and feasible way that we could probably complete this project.
We should probably make clear for anyone who watches this that the extra funding we're talking about would come out of our existing or ongoing budget. It's not coming out of the fundraising that was done by Yankton. That funding will still go towards reducing the principal of the opt-out, correct?
Yes, if Yankton still has some asks that are active, so that could still change. And as the community grows, that amount, the 884 annual opt-out levy doesn't change, so it just gets spread out across more folks. So, people should be clear on that. It still is all public money, so it's everybody's money. It's all public money. It's just not going to be applied onto their property tax. People need to be clear on that.
I think it's too much to take out of the BBB, my personal opinion, and the estimated project funds versus the cost. There's, according to my math, 320,000 approximately over.
Yeah,
So you could still take.
we padded a little bit,
So we could do 130 and make this balance out of the BBB.
We could. We haven't bid out yet. I don't want to have to come back and say, well, guess what, guys?
Just ask Kyle, he's got a lot of.
I asked Kyle for some training. He can come up here and ask for 30 million, and everyone says, "Yep, let's do it."
So all these numbers here, like I said, as long as we're talking about the 450 for the BBB, that's not saying we're going to automatically take $450,000 out of the BBB to put it into this. It's going to be the amount that's actually charged for or through estimates and stuff like that, and that goes with all of them. We're just not going to take the money and put it in there just because we're approving it in the budget.
Well, we certainly have to see what where everything shakes out, and the bond proceeds. There's a big difference between 12.6 and 13.5, and that's kind of the estimate that Toby Morris talked to us about, that he thinks that we'll be able to leverage. So, we put 12.6 in there on the low end. If it's closer to 13.5, that's less that would maybe need to be.
So I guess I'm okay with that. Even reluctantly okay with the 450 out of the BBB if we prioritize it, saying if it didn't cost us that much, maybe BBB would be the first one to get reimbursed or the last one to get pulled out, if that makes sense. Also, it does kind of address a little bit of a point that we've been dealing with for years on overspending the BBB, people coming, we go through the budget every year, figuring out who to give money to through the BBB, and then yet we still continually give out during the year. Well, if we don't have any money to give out, we can't do that anymore.
Well, you'll notice when we talk to when we talk BBB, I did follow your request at the strategic plan and put in a 5-year projection, and I did put 0% growth, which is probably not going to be the case. But at 0% growth, I've got you held down to pretty much what you're taking in. But that's not without having made some sacrifices, understand? And just so everyone knows, even Dwayne even put money back in the BBB after I'd taken some things out. He even put some in, so. So you want to talk a little about BBB? Do you want to talk more about the aquatics facility?
So can you clarify for me, this 450 that we would theoretically take out of the triple B, over how many years is that over the next 2 years?
Well, Al, maybe you can help me out because I think it depends upon what our payment schedule will be. They may require an upfront escrow, is that correct?
Well, and then the project itself, we aren't scheduled to be through construction for another year yet, so part of the donations even we have to front. They're not going to have, even if they get all their asks, a lot of those are over a 5-year period, so we'll have the first initial amount and the rest of that we'll have to front. The bonds themselves, just a little bit more of an explanation on that. When we first were talking about the opt-out, we used bond counsel's estimate at the time of 3.8% for 20 years, and that's where we came up with the 884,000. Since interest rates have decreased a little, and again, there's widespread speculation that the feds may be taking an interest rate cut, and that will immediately affect the market, and that's why there's that spread of that 12.6 to 13.5. If there's a Fed rate cut and we act quickly enough, that just increased our amount that we'll be taking in again. So all that'll have to be figured in also. And just another passing note, the FEMA projects, while that's not part of this, part of that could affect our cash flows. The FEMA money is reimbursable. We have to spend first. So we'll have to figure out how we can spend money up front, whether it's temporary loan, whether it's a 5-year loan, and whether we go out and go into the bond market really depends on how much we end up having to front on both this facility and the FEMA projects. If we're only talking 1 or 2 million, it's not conducive to go out to bond counsel. We'd probably just go to a local bank. Going to a local bank, most of those will require 5 years or less. So there's so many variables here, and a lot of it depends on what's going to happen in the next year or two for this facility and for the FEMA projects. That's March 21st changed our way of thinking and planning a whole lot differently.
Al, you might want to mention too the outside financing for that TID number 8 project, the 23rd Street west of West City Limits Road.
Yes, correct. That's another one that we don't have the money, the TID doesn't have the money. So again, whether we front the money somehow or whether we go out and borrow on that one again.
Yeah, and if the interest rates are good, we may want to borrow it,
Amy had asked me to come up with some estimates on local rates if we went with shorter term upfront money, so to speak, for each, based on 3%, 3.5%, and 4%. Each million borrowed, at 3%, it'd take about 215,000 annual payments. At 3.5%, it would take 218,000. At 4%, it would take 220,000. And that's per million. So again, when we're talking about fronting money and borrowing from a local bank, each million would cost you that annually to have to pay back. Again, it's kind of up in the air. There's so many moving parts yet that we'll let you know as soon as we get closer. The bids will determine some, the bond market will determine some. Whether we have to raid the BBB for the whole 100, 450, it all is a moving target yet.
Yeah, Commissioner Fertig put it well when he said, you know, what we're doing is budgeting. You're going to have the opportunity to, you know, discuss these financing and discuss, you know, make decisions on these things, because all these things will have to be approved through you all as we, you know, move through that process. Bid award, all those steps are going to be, you'll have the decision. So the budget is important, but it's a plan, and then you'll put the meat on the bones as the processes move along for both, well, for everything in here. You know, we have some bid awards tonight, and those were budgeted, but you don't have to approve them. If there's another way or a different way you want to do them, but you'll want to, because Corey did such a good job putting them together. Are we ready to talk a little more Triple B? And, you know, we can always sit with this and come back and talk about this later on. As I said, I kept the growth at 0%. I don't think that's going to be the case. Our Triple B hasn't performed really well this year, but we have had the cold weather months and we've had wet weather months. I think we're going to see a change in that. I think we're going to see a change in our community as well. I think the aquatics facility is going to be a game changer for our Triple B, and I think the announcement that Mount Marty has made with their football program and the field house is also going to be a change for our BBB. So I don't anticipate a 0% increase over 5 years, but I like to budget, you know, conservatively and then be surprised. So we did keep the facade program, for example, where it was. That was important to a lot of you, and people have a lot of good feedback from people that that's the biggest program that we have with the most visible result. And so that was important to a lot of people. I did not change the amounts that we've budgeted for the CVB and Yankton Area Progressive Growth. Both received an increase last year, and I held them steady. Still budgeting for fireworks because you just got to have fireworks, and the same amounts for the Kramer Kenyon Building, Lewis and Clark Theater. We did hold back on special events overtime. We're still budgeting for our website. The Boys and Girls Club funding ends this year, and as has the Mead Building funds. They drop off because we've completed our commitments there in terms of capital. I did take out the funds for the HSC land repayment. I know one of the things that you guys have been doing is when you sell property, city-owned property, you've been allocating that towards paying back the HSC purchase. So that was, to me, an easier cut in that it didn't impact some of the historically funded events or organizations. Onward Yankton and Riverboat Days both requested funds. I did not fund those. Mayor Johnson and I visited with Onward Yankton and the Meridian District, and to us, I want to speak for you, Mayor, but to me anyway, a lot of their activities that they're going to be pursuing this year aren't going to require financial support. They're organizational and structural. So we can talk about that if you'd like, but that's what my recommendation is at this time. Riverboat Days, I think the commitment, unless I hear something differently, is that you may be interested in assisting with a building for their storage, but we're not interested in paying for operational and event type expenses. So That's why that's reflected that way. We did keep the budget for special events coordinator activities. The Parks Department can't put on events without any budget, so we did keep that the same. And we kept the summer band and the baseball and the Yankton Area Arts as it was. We do have in an out-year budget some meeting room improvements. We don't think that $100,000 will probably quite cover it, but will get us a start. And we may need to make those sooner rather than later. I did cut out some of the transfer to the parks. That's banners, and we did spend a lot and made a big investment in banners this year, so we waited for a few years to do that as well. And then you see this in there, the transfer, the cap to transfer to the Memorial Park pool. If you look down at the bottom, you see that if we funded these things in these ways, this is what the balance would look like. And you see there 2024 with no growth and spending everything in there, you're down to pretty much nothing on your balance. But again, I don't believe that that's how that will end up looking, but I like to give sort of a worst case scenario for that. The special projects money, there was a line item for special projects, and that was money where, somebody would come and ask for something good in the community, and you guys would decide, if you wanted to fund it. I did zero that out. Again, the reason for that was, I think that's different than not funding an existing program or operation that is currently happening in our community. So it's just the commission's will and ability then to commit to saying, nope, that's not on our journey right now. We have other things to attend to, with the hope of then growing the Triple B long term. Just in concert with that, it's not Triple B, but it is outside agencies. We didn't change a whole lot. I didn't ask for, or I didn't provide any increases. In fact, the only difference really in an outside agency was we do have a commitment that you guys made previously to, some of you maybe saw it on the Missouri River Corridor, $25,000 for that. That's the MSAC study and assistance we're going to give to them. And then again, some additional, there's a small amount of money in there for the ongoing contribution. But the other entities there, we did not increase. I did not increase. I did keep transit at the same level that we funded them last year. In that, transit is one that we have been concentrating on. We can talk about that if you want to. The collective impact funding, I kept at the same level. Many of these entities did ask for more funding. Again, I held them where they were, especially knowing that the collective impact dollars, there's a board there that helps decide who and what, and so if they feel one needs to be funded in a, funded in a larger way or have more funding, they can do that. It's maybe done a sacrifice of a different agency. So happy to talk about any of those items.
I have a question. How are the PEG channel upgrades related to the meeting room upgrades, or are they?
Dwayne, do you want to take that one?
The meeting room upgrades will include the ability to live stream to the PEG channel, and so they'll be tied together in that way, but they will be a little bit independent of each other. One of the things that we've run into as an issue here is all of the equipment in this room is all analog, so that our ability to rebroadcast or do something with the recordings, they have to have processing done to them in the interim. All of the cameras in here are standard definition. While we're renewing our franchise agreement with the cable TV companies tonight at the regular city commission meeting, it doesn't include the provision to go to a HD channel, but I would imagine that will come in the near future, and that's something that we're not prepared for. When we broadcast even rebroadcast the meetings even to the YouTube or any of the live services. They're broadcast in 5:4 and not widescreen. So there's a number of provisions there. The PEG channel equipment that's in this year is actually to physically replace the character generator, the equipment that plays back the video files from the churches and other organizations in the community. And that's something literally we're on borrowed time. I've had difficulty in getting vendors to provide quotes. I've probably contacted 5 or 6 vendors. I have one quote. One of the other local organizations that had worked with that company did not give positive reviews, so I went back out and shopped some more for other vendors, and I'm still working to get another quote back. But the $20,000 that's budgeted for this year will be something that is able to be reimbursed by the 2 cable TV companies that hold a franchise agreement, and that's a 1% capital grant, and they'll have the option to either fund that fully themselves or to pass that cost along to their customers. The meeting room equipment would be something above and beyond that. Initially, when we did this room, the 2 cable TV companies did participate in helping fund some of the costs, but that was just a portion of it, and it was during the new construction.
And I think that we will be making some expenditures on meeting room equipment, because I think we'll be meeting in this room probably now longer than we might have thought we may be if we were going to do a new facility with the library or something like that. So I think it's probably worth the investment.
Just had a thought, maybe it'd be wise, because we have this conversation throughout the year, whether it's Boy Scouts or whomever comes forward and asks for money, we could have our slush fund within it. I think of special projects as maybe that's our go-to. We have a set amount. It's always a moving target every year. We say, well, we have money in the BBB, but maybe if we had a specific account that we could designate where it goes to each group that comes forward, we'd have that amount. I don't know, just a thought that within our BBB we had that. It seems like that would be reinstating the special project item.
Well, we did have a certain amount this year, but we added 20 or 30,000 to that so far. Yeah, and if there's cuts or things in there, this is just a recommendation. If there's things you think need to be shuffled, we can do that. There is $10,000 in professional services budgeted. That's one of those that might be able to be used if there was just something you really had to do.
May I ask, what happened to the $25,000 that we set aside in 2017 for Riverboat Days? In my head, it's sitting in a little safe in the back of Al's office.
It's not in a safe in Al's office. It's all part of the balance. We didn't put it somewhere. It's rebudgeted into the, into this year's triple B and the balance. So, you did say that if they were ready to build a building, you'd consider that. At this point, it's been long enough ago. I'd like to, if that's the case, if they come forward, I'd like to bring that back to the commission and say, are you still wanting to do that? I haven't heard any more talk about a building, however, this time.
This is a sidebar, but I would point out that Charlie Gross is still sitting upright and hasn't had a heart attack yet.
I wondered if he's one of the jaws that you're going to have to help. We're going to need the jaws of life to get Charlie's jaw off the floor here later.
I keep getting poked in this chair.
Yeah. Well, again, I realize that we increase the projects. There's a big increase in terms of what we need to do with FEMA and flood or disaster relief. There's a, we've got things long-term on the horizon at our wastewater plant. We're doing things though. I mean, and that's what it should be about. And, we want to make sure you guys are comfortable with that. But if we're going to grow and expand and become the community that you guys envision, we have to do things. We have to do things we need to do, and we have to do fun things, and all those things cost money.
Only one thing for certain is all the years I've been on here is this is the most uncertainty.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of answers to you today because I don't know a lot of information yet. It's so, we're going to be kind of, especially with our project with FEMA, we're going to be walking kind of through the dark here until we know how things develop, and we'll be coming back to you multiple times with projects.
I might be bouncing here, Amy, but I did circle something in the budget, and I didn't want to interrupt as we were going through, but a quick question on that, and of course I got to get to where I circled it. Okay.
Bathrooms at Riverside?
No,
okay.
I see that's still on there.
That's coming fall 2019.
I see that, yes. Happy to see that, as well as many others when you talk about frequenting our parks. Under streets, it says replace trucks, and I see in off year 21 and 22, it's at 0. Is that we've replaced and it's a rotation and we get 2 years off of doing that? And then we go back onto another rotation, or why? I just found it strange that those sit there at 0. when
Yes,
we've
but
funded it
Adam,
every
do you
other
want
year.
to talk a little bit about or Adam or Corey want to talk about truck replacement?
Yes, so we do have the scheduled maintenance replacement program, or the adopted replacement program for our fleet. And yes, those years, there is nothing in the truck cycle to be replaced.
Thank
We
you.
can add some in if you'd like.
No, it just looks strange that it sat very high, and then there was 2 years at 0, and then it went back up again. So
Yeah, so-
I figured that's what it was. I just wanted to clarify.
Yep, that's
Thank
what
you.
it is.
I would just echo what Jake said, and that there's so much variability this year that things could really swing our way and help us out, or things could go the other direction and make things even more difficult. But climate change is really playing a big role in the increased costs we're seeing here. Because you look at the Memorial Park flooding, that's something that we haven't dealt with before, and now we're dealing with the past 2 years. Community gardens, flooding the last 2 years. It's just a reality that we're dealing, well, of course, the Martin Creek issues we're dealing with now.
Yeah, and
Things
I
that have
think-
not happened in the recent past we're dealing with now, and I expect we'll be dealing with more of that volatility in the future.
I think the economy is unknown nationally and certainly locally. I think that'll make a big difference in what happens. That's all yet to be unknown. I'm not an expert on tariffs, and that could play a role. I know construction costs have changed, and, part of the reason we do a budget is to have a plan, but, all good plans are fluid, and you have to be willing to adjust them. And we also made commitments. This is not capital or triple B, but we made commitments to our employees that we're certainly going to honor as well. And that's important, and it's a great investment, but it's not a small amount of money either. So we have to remember that too in the back of our minds, that has to be a priority. So if you would like to have a continued discussion after this meeting, regular business meeting, or tomorrow, we can certainly do that. Otherwise, we're at 10:02, and you might want to have another cookie or a biological break before our next meeting. Just tell me if you're ready to, if you want to talk more, if you want to come back tomorrow, or what you'd like to do.
Okay, sounds like we are finished with this first run through the budget. Can we require city staff to have to stay through our regular meeting?
You can.
I'm just kidding.
Some
You
of
can-
them, some of them will stay anyway. Some of them will stay
It's nice
because
to have an audience.
there's pizza. what we'll do here is come back and continue to work on this project, knowing we're going to come back and talk about the two bigger projects with you, two bigger areas ongoing. And then we have another budget scheduled for August, I want to say we said like 7th or 19th? Was it after Riverboat Days? Okay. Sometime in August, we'll get the dates to you, and that's when we'll talk about operating, and we'll have this locked in. So if there are changes you want to make between now and then and programs that are important to you, or if the department heads come after me and really change my mind on something, then we'll bring that back to you and I'll let you know.
All right, I'm sure I speak for the whole commission when I say thank you to all the staff members in the audience tonight who have helped secure this budget for next year. I know it's been more difficult than usual with all the curveballs that have been thrown at us, and we've had to make some tough decisions, but you've certainly helped guide the commission in, I think, making wise decisions, so we appreciate that. Is there anything else the commission would like to say? Otherwise, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. And just to be clear, for anyone watching, we are not continuing the budget session as we had discussed was a possibility earlier after our regular meeting. So our budget discussion is over for now. Is there a motion? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Is anyone opposed? This meeting is adjourned until our regular session in about 10 minutes.
There's still more pizza and cookies if you are interested.